I'll pretend I'm Jelani Cobb. Hello, everyone. That's good enough. Well, I wanted to welcome you to the Columbia Journalism School, for those of you who aren't familiar. I am John Haskins, the Dean of Student Affairs, Prizes, and Professional Programs. We are fortunate to have a truly special event brought to you by the DuPont Columbia Awards team about the making of The Retrievals, a hit podcast series from Serial Productions and the New York Times. We'll hear from its makers in a conversation hosted by Ira Glass. Ira is the founder, host, and executive producer of This American Life, and we've lost count of how many DuPont Columbia Awards he's won. This American Life has won at least 7, including this year for Talking While Black, and Serial won for its first season, the story of Adnan Syed. Ira will be speaking with Susan Burton, host, writer, reporter, and producer of The Retrievals, who has worked at This American Life for years, and who's also the author of the memoir Empty. Ira will also be speaking with Laura Starecheski, producer and editor of the series, and a staff member of This American Life. Lisa's a 2019 DuPont Columbia winner for a story from Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. It was a team effort with PBS NewsHour, PRX, and the AP. We're being joined tonight by an online audience as well, live streaming on our YouTube page. So welcome to all of you out there on YouTube. We'll be opening it up for questions from both the in-person audience and from the virtual audience. For those of you on YouTube, you can put your questions in the chat and we'll go to as many as we can. Now, we'll hear the trailer from The Retrievals and then get to our conversation and your questions.
The women are seeking fertility treatment for a variety of reasons. They've had a couple miscarriages and they're pushing 40. They don't have fallopian tubes, or they need sperm. All of them wind up at the fertility clinic at Yale University. They meet their doctors, get the info, start giving themselves the shots. And eventually they get to the day they've been waiting for, the day of the first egg retrieval. The day of the retrieval, the women arrive at the clinic. They check in on different mornings, in different months, and calendar years. None of them are here on the same day, but they will come out of the day with the same story.
They started the procedure, and, I was just sort of taken by surprise, not expecting the excruciating pain. My blood pressure started going up. I was sweating profusely and telling them I was just in too much pain, that they had to stop. At that point, I remember them giving me more of the pain medication and me saying, it's not making a difference.
I remember yelling or kind of making and really looking in confusion at my nurse, the attending nurse, and her saying, I'm giving you the most I can legally give you.
She said that that's the maximum that she's allowed to give me, so she couldn't give me anything else.
At one point, they did say that I had maxed out. I couldn't have any more fentanyl or Versed. And I was like, how is this possible?
How is that even, how am I feeling?
How do people go through this?
I remember thrusting my hips up saying, I feel everything. I don't know. But what are you gonna do? I wanted the procedure done. I just let it happen and I was like, I'm awake, so.
The patients didn't know why they were in pain. Their doctors didn't know either. And in the absence of information about the pain, people came up with stories to explain it. The patients constructed stories. Staffers at the clinic came up with theories too. Eventually, a nurse would tell her own story about the pain, as would Yale.
The Yale Fertility Clinic is not one doctor in a back alley. This is an entire institution that's behind it. It's got this reputation. How do they not see that this is happening?
Am I being difficult? I mean, you just question your sense of self.
You are treated like a hysterical woman from the second you walk in.
Nobody believed me.
I felt crazy.
In fertility treatment, you evaluate the outcome by whether you wind up with a baby. The outcomes here are a lot more complicated for everyone.
Are you kidding me?
That's when I lost it.
I could almost feel like the bomb drop.
Bullshit. No harm done.
There's no way I can ever look at this lady the same way.
From Serial Productions and the New York Times, I'm Susan Burton. This is The Retrievals.
So I'm Ira Glass, this is Susan, this is Laura. When you hear that, what do you think?
The thing I was just thinking about was listening to it walking around the piers in Brooklyn Bridge Park the first week it had come out, and just feeling amazement that this thing that we'd been working on together for so many months was out into the world. I miss the patience. I miss being inside that tape. That's a feeling that I had when
Wait,
hearing the trailer
you
just
miss
now.
them interacting with them, or you miss being
I miss
with
being
the tape?
being with the tape. Being with the tape. I mean, I enjoyed interviewing the patients, obviously, but the time spent with the tape is so much greater than the time actually spent doing the interviews.
Laura, do you hear anything when you hear it now?
I was just kind of marveling again at the music and how sweeping it is, and somehow it works with the kind of delicate, measured sections as well as the super powerful sections at the end.
It sort of the music violates kind of a cardinal role in scoring for documentary, which is I think generally when the thing gets more intense and serious, you generally have to back off on the music. You don't do something melodramatic, because then it's sort of melodrama on top of melodrama, and it makes the true thing start to seem too cinematic and fake, which is I think actually one of the interesting things about the score is that you guys went totally in the other direction, and you're just let's just go for it in a way that actually I think is very effective in the series. So let's before we start, it would be I think helpful for the three of us to know how many of you are actually in the process of learning to make podcasts, or you've made podcasts, and specifically narrative podcasts where you're doing. Okay, that's good to know. I think Susan, I feel like there's a lot to cover with both of you, but let's just start briefly about how you found this story. It's something you saw in the news, right?
Totally, yes. So I was home one Friday evening, home from This American Life. Friday is the night we put out the show. I was home late. I was on the couch. I was scrolling through my phone, and it was just, I have Chrome on my phone, and there's the Discover feature, right? And this just came up in my suggested stories. It was a link to an article in the New Haven Register or a local Connecticut TV channel. I can't remember which. And the article said that there were several patients who just filed a lawsuit against Yale, and it sort of gave the bare bones facts of the thing. And I was just immediately drawn to it. I just wanted to know what happened, how it felt, the themes of addiction and women's pain and this powerful institution, the longing to be a mother. I was just immediately pulled to the whole thing. And by the next morning, I'd already downloaded everything possible from Pacer about the nurse's criminal case and reached out to the lawyer named in the article, the lawyer who was representing the patients in their lawsuit against Yale, and wrote a pitch for This American Life a few days after that.
And when you say women's pain, you mean specifically women's pain being ignored, that's...
I mean, it was hard to know exactly what from that article. The article wasn't leaning into the theme of these women said they were in pain and they were dismissed for months and months. They were not believed. The substance of the article was mostly there was a nurse who was addicted to fentanyl and she was swapping it out with saline, and these patients didn't get appropriate pain medication. The feeling of being dismissed, of not being believed, all of that was more something that emerged really strongly
Later.
once I started interviewing.
Okay, so then you wrote up a pitch for This American Life. I dug it up today, and it's a page and a half long, just in case anybody wants to write a pitch to our show. And the first 6 paragraphs tell the story, but from Donna's point of view, you basically start with, she became a nurse. It was really hard to become a nurse, and she was married to this abusive guy, and it was really great because if she's working, it's an escape from the guy, and then you tell the incident that with her husband Ron that makes her, or ex-husband Ron, I guess, that makes her start taking fentanyl, and you reveal in the pitch, you explain that she starts stealing it. Dozens of patients don't get the drug, and so you summarize that in the pitch, 6 paragraphs, and then there's a long quote that you go to, which is good in the pitch to go to some direct evidence from the trauma surgeon who gets interviewed in the show, who was having a retrieval and could tell that it wasn't fentanyl. And you got that quote from...
So that the trauma surgeon, she's actually not interviewed, but I do use her quote. It's from the transcript of Donna's sentencing hearing.
Okay. And then you explain in the pitch that you want to talk to everybody in the story. You want to talk to Donna, you want to talk to the women, you want to talk to Yale. But if you can't get them, you say, if you can't get any, if they don't want to talk, if Donna doesn't want to talk, if Yale doesn't want to talk, basically you say the trial transcript covers a lot of what we would need, and then you quote from it. And then there's a graph where you explain why you're drawn to the material, which is basically what you just said.
I'm so glad, because I didn't look back at the pitch.
Yeah. And that was the conception at the beginning. And then, is that different? Like, did you have a different picture in your head of what it would be at the beginning than what it turned out to be? Did it shift?
Oh, for sure. I mean, at the beginning, I really thought it was going to be much more about addiction, that it was going to be about the collision of Donna's need for fentanyl with the patient's need to have children, with their longing to have children. And it wasn't until I started interviewing patients that all these other themes surfaced. And then also, months and months went by, and I was getting no closer to persuading Donna to talk to me or even to respond to me. And so, yeah. But at the beginning, I thought it was going to be very much about these patients and this nurse and her need and their need.
Okay, so just to explain the process again, so you pitch that on This American Life stuff. We say, yeah, look into that. And so you start making phone calls. You're reaching patients. You can't reach Donna. How do you reach out to Donna? What do you do?
So I talked to patients over the course of like 2 or 3 months. I talked to 11 patients. I didn't reach out to Donna until after I'd done all those interviews. My first reach out to Donna was a pretty long letter. I felt pretty convinced that I would be able to persuade her. I felt pretty confident of that. It was a personal letter explaining some of the reasons that I was drawn to this material. I gave, a lot of examples of my work. I was basically, trying to convince her that I would tell her story sensitively and fairly, but also to make clear that, I was talking to all these patients who'd been hurt by her, and I didn't want Donna to have any illusions that about what I was doing, and didn't hear back from her after that first letter.
And it was a letter like you sent it in the mail?
I sent it multiple ways. I sent it in the mail. I emailed like an email address I found online. I sent it through social media channels, basically just like reaching out to her any way I could find.
Okay, so she's a no-go, and then do you also reach out to Yale at that point, or is it too early for that?
It was too early for that. Laura and I talked a lot about when the moment to reach out to Yale was. I was reaching out to staffers at the clinic during that stage when I was reaching out to Donna, finding people who'd worked there or who still worked there and figuring out who to reach out to. But as far as like Yale as an institution, we didn't go to them for comment until not long before we released the trailer, until we could really present them with all of the claims and allegations.
Before we go any further, can I just ask, are we working the microphones close enough? We were told to work them more close. Both of us are. We don't have to. Okay, good. And Laura, could you talk about when is the right moment to go to Yale with this kind of thing?
I mean, with a story like this, when it was really difficult to get anyone who was associated with Yale to talk to Susan, and hard for her to gain their trust. Just jump in if I'm mischaracterizing anything. And it took months and months, not only to win over people who would talk on background and start to give us some kind of picture of what had been happening at this clinic, but also just to learn enough and be confident enough in the reporting to be able to bring it to Yale so that they would have something to answer to. So I think there's always like a very stressful sweet spot when you're reporting something like this, where you want to have enough of the reporting really solid, but still have enough time to have a little bit of a back and forth if hopefully Yale, we hoped that they would give some kind of response other than a statement, and that didn't end up happening. But we wanted to allow time for that. We hoped maybe someone would do a sit-down interview. That also didn't happen. But just to allow for enough time to incorporate whatever their response would be.
Okay, so for months you're gathering this information, mostly talking to the patients, and then how do you get them to say yes, and how does that work?
The patients?
Yeah, what were those interviews like?
Yeah, so the patients, so I'd initially reached out to the lawyer who was representing the patients in the lawsuit, and the first thing I did, there was a conference call where any of these patient plaintiffs who were interested in talking to me could get on the conference call and just hear a little bit about what I had to say and ask any questions. So I did that. After that call, there were...
Could we just pause on that, because I
yeah.
feel like so much of being a reporter is talking people into shit they don't want to do. And I like personally feel like I spend a long time on emails trying to convince people to talk to me. Could you just like lay out your plot points? What do you say to some woman who's in the middle of this lawsuit to talk about her egg retrieval on national media, talk about something so personal? Like, what's your pitch? Give me the plot points.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that is coming into my head is that after that call, I remember calling one of the lawyers and saying, "Thank you so much. You did such a good job pitching my story better than I could." So I don't know that I did such a good job on that call. I mean, I think I just spoke really authentically. I think I just said I was really drawn to the story, their experiences. I thought it was important to talk about. I wanted to know what happened. I talked about some of my experience doing sensitive stories, doing stories about trauma, and just sort of, laid out the process. I think it was sort of a self-selecting group. Anybody who was on this call was already like a little bit like curious about who this reporter was and what it would be like to participate. So it wasn't like a super duper hard sell.
Okay, and then once you got to the interviews, like, was a lawyer present?
Yes. So that was one of the boundaries, was that a lawyer would be present for all of these interviews. And so I didn't know how that was going to go, right? After the first couple of interviews, it became clear that the lawyers were only going to intervene when there was like an issue of attorney-client privilege. Like a patient starts saying, "Oh, well, I remember the first time I talked to Josh about that." Like that's really, they were really hands-off in a way that I appreciated. But the big challenge it posed was time. So the lawyers were very busy, and I could schedule interviews in 1 hour blocks. And occasionally I would be like, "Oh my gosh, can we go 6 minutes over?" Or there was a time when I went like 45 minutes over, and then that was a big deal. But I really had to be super rigorous and disciplined in terms of structuring the interviews so that I could get the tape I needed, because I wasn't sure how much access I would have again.
And so would you do this? So would you structure those interviews as a chronology? Again, thinking about like, you only have an hour with a person, some stuff that's going to be essential. Would you say, tell me about your experiences from the beginning? Like, where would you begin? Like, had you read a deposition from each person so you knew what they could say?
No, so I didn't know anything about each patient other than their name. As soon as I had the names of the people who wanted to talk to me, so I Googled all of them and found out, so I knew a little bit like, oh, this person has an interesting job, but and would make a note to like ask them about their professional life. But I structured the interview the way I learned from Ira to structure interview over the years at This American Life. I structured it in chapters. So the first chapter was sort of prologue, and that was a challenge to figure out where exactly to start the interview. And Laura and I talked about this, and Laura gave me a really helpful advice. So it was like, where do you start? Like what do you say to somebody? So I wanted to know before the egg retrieval, right? Like I knew the egg retrieval was the center of the interview, but where do you start? Do you say, tell me about your fertility journey? Like that could be a really long journey. So what were you feeling in the few days before the retrieval was the question I think that we landed on together. And
wait,
and
let's pause on that. Why is that a good question?
Because if you start to go into somebody's like long backstory, because I think it's probably true that all of these people would have had a long journey to get to this egg retrieval, it's probably going to make them feel like vulnerable and start to kind of get into that state where you're just like narrating a story that you've told before, and it would also just take up too much time. Like, I was worried that it would just take up, it would be hard to interrupt that, and it would take up like a third of the time.
And then, but the thing you're choosing is, tell me about how you felt in the days before the retrieval. What's the thinking there? Like, why is that the sweet spot?
To kind of get a snapshot of what was their emotional state going into it without having to have the whole backstory. Like, of course, if we had more time, like, I'm interested in the backstories, but in this situation, couldn't go there.
I mean, truth be told, I would start the interviews with a question like, what brought you to the Yale Clinic, which seemed to me to split the difference between, like, tell me where your fertility journey started. And because if you just, what I found was that people did want to give some context. And so it usually worked out pretty well. And what people had to say was often important in terms of understanding the story. Everybody understood that we were only here for an hour, and they were, trying to get across stuff as efficiently as possible.
And so the interviews on the show, was that each of them? You only had them for an hour, or you could go back? You went back to some of them.
So I was able to do follow-ups with 4 patients. So yeah.
And those were only an hour also.
Those were a little longer. It varied. There were I did 2 of the 4 follow-ups were pretty long, like 90 minutes to 2 hours, and then the other 2 follow-ups were very short, like 20 to 30 minutes.
Okay, so again, we're still in some early phase. You did your pitch. You're doing these interviews, and you talked to like 10 or 12
So
patients?
I talked to 11. Initially, I talked to 11 patients.
Do we say on the air that their lawyers were present? I can't remember.
We do. That.
Okay. Yeah, we disclose. Okay, and then at some point you reformulate and you realize it's not a This American Life story. It's too big. Is this that point?
Yes. So after I had done 11 patient interviews, so I happened to be talking to our colleague Julie Snyder at Serial, and she was saying that she wanted to do more shorter podcasts. They just released We Were Three, which was 3 episodes, and I thought, well, I think I have enough material. Like, at that point, it was clear to me that these patient interviews had just been amazing. The patients were so vulnerable and insightful and interesting and different. I just felt that there was a series there. So I sat down and over the weekend wrote a pitch for the series, and that was the point that I knew.
And can you guys describe, maybe Laura, like the difference between the original This American Life pitch and this new pitch for the series?
Yeah, I think the original pitch was, like you said, focused on Donna's narrative, and then had like a hope maybe we'll get to talk to people on all sides of this thing. And the Serial pitch, like when I went back and read it today, and I was kind of amazed at how it really mirrors what the series actually became. Like, there ended up being one more episode than you laid out there, but you laid out, like, episode 1 is the patients, episode 2 is the nurse, episode 3 is the hearing, and episode 4 is Yale and what was going on at the clinic. And some of the language from that pitch was preserved somewhat, like pretty close in the opening of the series itself. Like it felt like reading it, I was like, oh, this was already a formed thing.
For me, the most important thing about that pitch was finding the voice for the series. Like, as soon as I sat down to write it, that was the voice that came out. The first sentence of the trailer you just heard. The women are seeking fertility treatment for a variety of reasons. That's the first sentence of the, episode 1 pitch. And I just, the voice just came out so easily, and it, it solved some of the problems, right? It's so if there's this group of women, right, then we don't have to rely on one patient. And I knew because of the boundaries with the attorneys that I might not have the kind of hours and hours of access that I would need for one patient to carry through a series. And it conveyed the feeling that I'd had after doing these interviews back to back, which is like pattern and volume, and patient after patient is saying the same thing, and I don't understand what's happening. Why is this continuing to happen? Why does nobody seem to be noticing? And I felt like the voice did those things, and it just felt it just felt I enjoyed writing in that voice, and it just felt right.
Wait, and you just sat down and started to try to write the pitch, and that's the voice that came out.
Exactly. Yes.
It's funny because that voice reminds me of there was a novel years ago called Virgin Suicides. Sofia Coppola made it into a film also years ago, and the narration in that novel was really unusual because it was the group of girls who are the center of the story narrated in first person plural, a kind of we this, we that. And I remember hearing the first draft of episode 1. I was like, oh, it's just like that. I was wondering, was that even in your head, or?
It wasn't in my head. It's like a model. I know the Virgin Suicides, but it wasn't like a direct model. Although I do think that that's the music. There's sort of like a lushness. I feel like there is like a Sofia Coppola, like Virgin Suicides does, translated by Sofia Coppola vibe in the music.
For sure.
Yeah.
And let's give people a sense of scale, because I think I just remember being a beginner and not having any sense of, how long does stuff take? And should we just talk about if you were to make a normal This American Life story, kind of an ambitious one, how many months would that be? One where there's 2 or 3 sources and you have to figure out what the hell happened. How many months would that take for usually?
Oh gosh, Laura, I'm going to let you answer this because it might take me a long time because I'm a little slow.
Maybe 4 to 6 months if it's a whole hour.
Yeah.
If it's a whole hour.
Yeah. And I would say in general, when we do This American Life, there'll be one story that took us between 2 or 3 months. There'll be one story that's kind of the hard reported anchor story that we spent 2 or 3 months on. And then often, and this is horrible to say, everything else comes together in the last 3 weeks. We make everything else in the last 3 weeks. And so today is Tuesday, and I still have to finish reporting out one of the stories for this week's show. So and that's very normal. So there'll be some fast stuff, some slow stuff. And then explain how long this took to make. And with the understanding of we are spending way more time, Serial spends way more time making our shows than anybody, I think, in podcasting. So just explain how long it took.
I mean, I personally think it came together fairly quickly.
It did.
I was going to say it was fast.
Yeah,
it was, okay,
because
yeah.
I saw that news article I'm talking about. It was almost exactly 2 years ago. It was late November 2021. Pitched it to This American Life. Pitched it to Serial in March of 2022. And then I was still, doing my job at This American Life while I was working on the Retrievals. Switched over to the Retrievals full time in September 2022. And then, the series came out June 2023. So it was pretty fast.
Yeah, for that many episodes also.
Yeah.
And Laura, explain when you came in and what your role was.
Yeah, so I read Susan's initial pitch, the This American Life pitch, and immediately messaged her and was like, I love this story. I would love to be involved in this story in any way. I would love to just talk to you about it. Can we just talk about it? And I want to hear more. I love health reporting, especially. I had just done a series on addiction and was into doing something on addiction that was on addiction treatment. So this was a totally different lens and angle. And I just loved even in the initial pitch, I loved the question and the way Susan was thinking about it. And then we started talking about it, and then agreed that I would edit it, the This American Life version. And then Susan wrote this great pitch that I didn't even know was happening. And then I ended up going over to Serial to work on it alongside
And then how did
her.
the two of you work together? Like, what were you doing as part of the process? Because different editors work different ways. Different people want different things from their editors.
Yeah, so I think just to be like maybe overly descriptive about it, so we talked a lot about like the different forms that the story could possibly take, how to get like some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, like how to convince people to talk. I would go over things like the Donna letter and like make suggestions, anything I could come up with to make it more convincing. And then at the point where there was tape to listen to, we just started listening to tape together in a structure, I think. It wasn't just like listening through, this interview was like this interview was like that. It was like you had already pulled a bunch of tape and we listened through to that.
And those are basically your favorite parts. Were they were in a structure at that point, or no?
It was like I don't usually do the step of playing. I like to play a draft through, but I, now that this was like this project for Serial, I really wanted somebody to like just reality test some of this, and also we were talking so much about these patients. I wanted you to know them the same way that I knew them. So yes, but I was highlighting things that like felt meaningful and important, and playing those.
And was it broken down like as often we do, like in playing tape for each other, when we have a piece in process of being like, okay, I think like this person might come first, and then here's all the people talking about, oh, I knew, I didn't know. Now here's all the people talking about like where we see how we see their jobs reflected through their reactions. Like, did you divide it off like that?
This was more just like meet Julia, meet Leia, it was just person by person. Yeah.
Okay. And let's talk about like some of the specific episodes and making some of the specific episodes, like episode 2, where you're doing Donna, but you don't have tape of her. You both talk about kind of the general strategy on how you're going to deal with that problem of having like a story, a portrait that you're going to make of somebody without their assistance, without an interview. Like how do you go about thinking about here's how I'm going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, well, that was obviously a big challenge, right? So at some point it became clear that Donna was highly unlikely to participate.
But wait, I want to just jump in really quick, because to get to that point, there were a lot of people who wrote letters of support to the court for Donna, like family and friends, and there were probably like 60 some letters. And Susan reached out to many, many of those people. Like the process, like it was not just sending letters to Donna. It was like contacting many, many people in every way that you could think of, to try, from like cold calls to snail mail to Facebook Messenger or whatever, to try to get someone to
reporting
like,
principle that if you can't get this person, just get the people around them to like tell you. And did you get many of those people to talk to you?
No, and that was the surprising thing, right? Because usually, like, you're like, oh, I'll crack this eventually. I just need the one person who's going to lead me to the other people. But no, I mean,
I couldn't believe it. It was like a wall.
Yeah,
like almost as if they had all agreed. Like,
I mean,
we're not doing this.
It wasn't like nobody at all responded. Like there were people who did respond, but nobody who was willing to, sort of be that person to open up that part of the story to me.
Because when you would say to them like, no, here's why I need you, is because I want to really understand how Donna sees it in a sympathetic way. I want to know her point of view, which is assume what any reporter would say. Why would they say no? Why wouldn't they say like, I understand why she isn't going to talk to me, like she has this whole trial thing, but like, her, like why can't you like help me understand her? What would they say? It
wasn't even that level. It was either no response, or it was I would call and just, please don't call this number again, or in the limited interactions I had with people who responded like a little more, it was just like, this is Donna's story. I want to respect Donna's privacy. Donna is my friend.
Okay. All right. So you reach out to all these people. You don't get any of them. All right. So what's the strategy? How do you go about it?
I mean, so I felt pretty confident that that we could do this story without Donna, because for a couple of reasons. One, the patients were, not all of them, some of them were less interested in Donna than others, but some of them were really curious about her, and they were trying to invent her. Who was she? You know, why had she done this? And I felt like it was really organic to the storytelling to try to answer those questions, because they were questions that the patients had. They were questions that I had. Who was Donna? Why had she done this? I was trying to invent her. And then, you know, sort of the framing of the series is there was this pain that was unexplained. Everybody told themselves stories. Everybody came up with reasons for this pain. Everybody told stories about this pain. And Donna also told a story about the pain. She told a story in this personal letter that she wrote to the judge. And then, you know, she told a story about what happened to her friends and family. And then her friends and family also wrote these letters to the judge. So I felt it was important to tell the story that Donna and these others told, in part because it becomes important in episode 3 when we learn how Donna is treated in the criminal justice system. And Donna's story about the pain is about her troubled marriage and her status as a mother. And her status as a mother is the thing that leads to her, that seems to lead to her receiving a light sentence in court.
Yeah. But I remember, like, you were up till the end, you actually, like, were pulling stuff out of the draft. In the very, like, what were some of the things that you cut in the very end? Do you remember?
Let's see if I can remember something specific. I mean, there's a portion of the second episode, which is mostly about Donna, and there's like kind of like a back half of that episode that's just a lot of script, and I'm telling you Donna's story. And I definitely cut a couple, like, more personal paragraphs about, you know, here's why I'm telling you this story. Even though this person is not participating, here's why. Like, there are a few sentences in there like that, but there was, like, more. And it just felt sort of unnecessary when I heard it in the mix. And then I think that like, a lot of what we cut were additional biographical details.
Yeah.
You know, like, this friend said this, or here's an example of something somebody wrote in a letter. And it was just more than we needed.
But your sourcing basically for that episode is the court documents, basically. That's what you've got. But you knew they were rich enough that you could actually tell a story.
Exactly.
Yeah. Laura, you've told me that that the first drafts of each episode, Susan would present the first draft of each episode, and they were pretty good until you got up to episode 4. Lay that out for me. Like, what were the early ones like, and what was episode 4 like? How was it different?
It was the first 3 were a similar experience to reading the serial pitch, where it was like, these are formed. Each one is its own world. They feel complete in a way, even in the first draft. And it was easy to see, like, these aren't going to be hard problems to solve. Like, I think it was hard to wrestle with doing the episode focused on Donna and making sure that we felt good about how she was being portrayed, given that she wasn't participating. Like, that was something that we did wrestle with a lot. But other than that, the first drafts were very close. And then episode 4 was the episode where we go behind the scenes of this clinic and start to understand, like, how did this possibly happen? Like, how were this many patients experiencing this? And there are presumably doctors and nurses in the room, and no one's noticing a pattern or intervening in a way that would make sense according to what the patients say they experienced. And that episode was like I was saying before, it was really hard to report. I'm trying to think. I think all the sources were on background. So there's no one named. There are no Yale staffers named.
And how did you even get them to talk to you? Like, how did you get their names? Would you just cold call them? Would you email them? Like, what would you do to even, like, reach out to those people? These are the people in episode 4 about Yale's response. So, like, what would you do to get them?
I mean, similar strategy as with Donna, a combination of emails, social media, snail mail, telephone calls.
Got it. Okay. And then so when you heard episode 4 did not have the kind of like, oh, I see the structure's all there. Maybe we got to take it a little here, explain this a little more, you know, just like what was episode 4 like?
Episode 4 was basically like the result of months of reporting. The first version of it that I heard was basically like, here's everything that I learned.
How long was it?
I would say.
How long?
It was probably would have been like close to 2 hours or
And
something.
it was just that it wasn't even it was like only half of the thing, but it wasn't meant to be a real draft.
Yeah, we were just getting something out, getting something going, getting something out there in the world to start working with it.
Yeah.
But I think that's something. It was like an illustration of how inside the material Susan was and how inside the reporting she was, because she had learned so much, and there was a whole, like, it was chronological and it was very deep reporting, amazingly, given
But deep
that, like,
reporting
how
where you-
reluctant people were to talk about what had gone on at 2 different locations of the clinic and what had happened over periods of different years, and a whole like a lot of reporting. And in addition to that, like outside of the Yale Clinic, just in the world of fertility medicine and pain management, that there was like a whole, in drafts of it that I was looking at earlier to remind myself, there were whole sections, like in the final version of that episode, you only hear from patients at the very beginning, but in the body of the episode there's no patient tape. And in an earlier version of it, we had a whole section with like other people who work in fertility medicine and pain management and OBGYN medicine. And I think you talked to 10 of them, or more than 10, like fertility doctors.
Just experts who weren't at Yale to reflect on like how could this have happened?
Yep.
Yeah, like I just needed context for what happened at Yale, and just to understand, was this normal, and how did an egg retrieval usually go, and what kind of pain management do you use, and do you know about this protocol that they were using at the Yale Clinic, and all of that. I mean, after that draft, it was super helpful. Like, Laura listened to it, and you were like, well, what you did is you had the impulse to just share all your findings, and it was just so helpful to have Laura name what I had done. But
which is normal. That's normal. That's a normal phase.
But it was hard because I couldn't, when I was talking about writing the pitch and episode 1, I had a voice. I didn't have a voice for episode 4. I didn't have any characters. Everybody was on background, and their identities needed to be protected. And so, like, there were no humans who could populate it. And then I couldn't even sort of make like a choral voice work, because it revealed too much. I couldn't find a way into it, and it was
right, because all the normal structures that you would use, so those are not available to you.
Those were not available.
Okay.
And then it was also hard to know, what like I could include all this stuff in the draft, but who knew? Because an agreement I had with these background sources was that I would go to them, and I would share with them. Like, this was the agreement I made with them, that I would share what information I was including, to make sure that it could not be individually, traceable back to them. And so, there were all kinds of details that, like, I longed to include, and did try and slot into those early drafts that, like, it wasn't realistic to include them and still protect the sources.
And so what cracked it for you? Like, how did you crack it?
I mean, I really didn't. I mean, like, it was really late in the game. Each episode was released on.
Oh, wait a second. That's right. The last week, you completely tore it up and like redid it.
Totally.
Because why? That's right. It's something I remember. It was like days before it was going out.
It was days
and
before.
What did you redo? That's right. This totally comes back to me. Right.
Yeah.
And what did we redo? What was it?
Well, it was like so the episodes would come out on a Thursday morning, and I guess Sunday. We just weren't happy with the draft. It just didn't seem.
And there's a
good
recorded
enough.
story.
It
at
was
that point.
supposed to be.
It was recorded. It was like, I mean, they had a rough mix, right? There was music under it even, and so we kind of tore it up, and like Laura, you looked back at it today, so you might be able to say more what we did, but I feel like we tried to make it like more efficient. Like, if this episode isn't really working, let's just make it go faster. And then I retracked that episode, but then we listened to it.
Keep going.
But then we listened to it on Wednesday morning, and it just didn't hold together. And then that's when we were like, we just need to fix this and strategically go back to some of the earlier sections that, in retrospect, were working just fine.
Yeah. which is it's a weird part of the process when you realize like you've gone past the point where it was the best and then you made it worse again somehow.
Yeah.
And that's where we were.
Wait, what was the thing you were like? What was the thing that was wrong with it over the weekend that you realized like Sunday, like, oh no, let's rip it up? Like, what was it?
It just didn't. I think it needed. I think the things that it needed on on Sunday or over the weekend, it needed some what we call signposting. Like it needed some clearer delineation between sections. I think.
Let's slow down on that. Just like that's a thing that we're constantly talking about when we're editing stories for Serial and This American Life. And if you think about like you're doing narrative, right? So you're telling like, okay, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. But periodically you need to jump out and say, here's why I'm telling you this story. Like here's what this next section is. Okay, so now you know that. Okay. Now let's talk about this part of it. That's the signposting. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that over the weekend was when I sort of landed on something that helped me understand how to think about the episode. Like I wrote some lines about how, I wished I could write about the staffers at the clinic in the same way that I wrote about the patients, but because of anonymity, I couldn't. So what you were going to hear in this episode was going to be like a little more forensic, a little more procedural, a little more like a case study of how drug diversion happens and how it gets missed. And then I felt like, okay, I'm telling the audience, like I was setting an expectation as far as tone, and that was really helpful to me in terms of thinking about what the episode was able to do.
Okay, let me ask you both this next question, and while we're doing that, I just want to say we have time now for your guys' questions, and please ask about any part of the process that's interesting to you or will be helpful. We're really here for you guys, and also for people who are watching online. I'll say you can give us questions online. I have no idea how those will be delivered to us, but I'm sure someone will let me know. So if you want to line up at this microphone, if you have questions while I ask this question, what advice would you give to somebody beginning in journalism now? Like, what advice would you give?
I mean, I think that if you happen upon something you love, pursue it. I know that sounds very general, but it is what happened here. I found this story, I had a feeling about it, and I threw myself into it, and that's one way to make meaningful work. I'm sure you have good advice.
I was going to
Laura.
give very similar advice, which is just like pay attention to the stories that you're actually drawn to. Other people may not understand why they're so important to you, but hopefully through the process of making them, you can convey that. And in terms of like practical advice, what I did when I was starting as a freelancer was just tried to like pitch to a bunch of outlets that I liked, just kind of like one after another, so that I could get a range of different clips and stories that I've made for different shows, just to get the experience, and also to be able to show, like, I've worked for this show and this show and this show and this show, and I kind of did it. That was like one of the only methodical things I did. Everything else I did was like slow and didn't make much sense, but I think that was a good move.
All right, I'm going to give my advice, and my advice would be just to make things now. I think like when I was beginning, I was much less talented than either of you, and it took me a decade before I could write a decent radio story. And when I give public talks, sometimes I play stuff from my like 8th and 9th year, and it's terrible. And I just want to say, like make stuff now. Don't wait. Make stuff, and put yourself on a schedule where you're making stuff sort of regularly. I think it's good if you can find something that you're excited about, that you're drawn to. But honestly, I would take any assignment. But my goal was that within this assignment, there will be something in there that gives me personal pleasure. Like, I would do the assignment, but there would always be like some moment, some piece of tape, something I was trying with the writing that was there for me. Like, you can take any assignment and make it yours and try to make it special and just build that muscle. And honestly, I think making big, ambitious things is good, but I also think just doing a volume of work, that was the thing that taught me how to make stuff. I was genuinely bad. Okay. So you can have the first question.
All right. Hi, I'm Natalia. Thanks for being here. I have a question for Susan and one for Susan and Laura. So I wanted to know how clear it was for you while you were doing the interviews that you would use them like you did in the show, like lined up as if like they work like as a collage, right? Like how much did you know about it when you were interviewing people? And also I wanted to know about your process of structuring the script. Like, do you do it visually, or like is a mess? Like, do you use Post-its? Like, yeah.
Yes, so thank you. So that's a great question. So as far as the sort of collage or montage or vox that's in the first episode where all of the patients are talking about their retrieval procedure, I did know that I hoped to be able to do something like that. There's a story I did many years ago when I was a beginner. It's called Tornado Prom, and it's about a small Kansas town where a tornado hit on prom night, and I had done a similar thing in Tornado Prom, and Tornado Prom was sort of what I had in mind when doing the interviews. And in that story, I'd just gotten everybody to tell the story of their prom, and here I got everybody to tell the story of their egg retrieval. And then, and of course, there were other things too, right? As I started doing the interviews, I realized that there were other shared experiences, and so then I had everybody talk about those other shared experiences too. And then as far as structure, there was a point when we were, like just sort of moving forward with Serial, where I did map out, like using Google's spreadsheets or something, like just a map of what the 5 episodes would be, and that's something I don't usually do, and it was actually very helpful to me because it just made it seem possible to make this thing, and I did rely on it when I actually started writing through the episodes, even if I didn't always.
And the elements in the map would be like, okay, now they'll talk about this thing, then I'm going to do this thing, then I'm going to do this kind of thing. That's your basic structure.
Exactly. Just sort of blocking it out. Like episode 1 would be the days before the retrieval. We meet one patient, Laura. Retrieval vox. Billboard. That was actually a big question in the first episode, is where to put the from Serial. This is what the series about. This is from Serial. Like that.
That's
kind
the
of
billboard.
thing.
Yeah. And the other part, like getting to a draft. Like, how long does it take you for an episode? Like, if it's going well, to get to the first draft?
I mean, it varied. Like the first episode, it took. I would say that one took 6 weeks. And then episodes 2 and 3, I played at the same time 6 weeks later. But then, episodes 4 and 5 weren't ready when we released, episode 1 in June. So those took a lot longer. There were a lot of things we tried in between, a lot of reporting that happened, and there were episodes that we tried that didn't work out. So it wasn't like I was just trying to write episodes 4 and 5 the whole time. We were just trying other things that didn't work
And before we get to the next question, I think maybe we should explain how the editing process works, both for Serial and for This American Life, where you would do a draft, and then, Laura, do you want to explain what would happen then?
Yeah, so I think initially you would just play it for me. There would usually be just us.
And play it means
through.
that Susan would read her script and play the quotes when you got to the quotes. You would time
perform it as a radio story, playing tape, reading the script. And then after we made whatever tweaks we wanted to make to that first draft, then we would bring in more people to hear it, and ideally have a mix from that point on with every new draft of people who've heard it before, who had notes that we wanted to make sure got addressed, and also people who had not heard it at all to have fresh ears on it.
How many edits like that, how many read-throughs would you do typically for an episode? I would say for This American Life story, it's rare for there to be a story that we do fewer than 3 read-throughs. And in every read-through, we have at least one person who's never heard it, just in case we did something crazy in between drafts. Somebody could say, this makes no sense at all. And so would generally do 3, but then in this week's show, there's a story that Laura has been editing that's gone through 12 drafts, but because it's especially, you'll hear it's like completely, it's all these immigration officers who were replacing their voices with actors' voices, and they're telling all these inside stories of very complicated policy changes in immigration law. So to do that interestingly and also have it be clear what the hell happened has been quite a technical feat, but that's in the high end. So how many edits would you do on a typical episode, like on one that was going well, for this?
Maybe 4.
Yeah,
I think.
maybe. Yeah.
That's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, next question.
Hello, everyone. I'm a visiting scholar from China of Columbia J School. So I apologize, like I didn't know anything about This American Life before this event. But last night, I asked my AI assistant, I asked her, like, what is this podcast and who is Ira Glass? And he gave me a lot of words, you know, and he said, like, oh, this is an OG podcast. It's like granddaddy of all of them. And like they have a killer teams. And also something like, they said you have a voice like butter, and your voice can be, it's like your distinct cadence. It's like a combination of a jazz musician and a radio anchor and a sitcom character, which can be spotted miles away. I also asked him, like, did you like quote it from some other comments? He said, no, I just regenerated it by myself. So like after reading all the comments, so I know this is really a great podcast. So I listened to the Retrieval last night. I was about to listen to just one episode, but I couldn't stop. I listened until the end. So I was like really blown away of the good storytelling and the delicate editing of all of this. But I have like 2 very simple questions. One is about the music, because I was really, really impressed by the original music. I think there is some melody it's a combination of different women singing high or low, like moms, like ariels, like sighs, like, you know, ha 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 ha, this kind of thing. And it was like very powerful and matched perfectly with your story. So I want to know more process of how you combine the music with recording. This is first. Second one is I'm an investigative reporter, so I know how important to get the exclusive sources. I did my investigative report back to China, so I would not do this story if I cannot get the exclusive interview from Dona and or from the Yale University. But I'm amazed, like you still made a powerful story without both of them. But I wonder, like, how can you like have the, of course you have explained a lot of the backgrounds, but I wonder, like, this is such a, you know, dramatic and important story. So why didn't say 60 Minutes or Frontline do anything on it, or had they do anything on it? And how can you have the patience to wait for so long and work for so long without worrying some other programs would, you know, get ahead?
Okay, we're going to run out of time for them to respond.
Okay.
Well, okay, I'll answer the second question first, because that one is faster. I constantly worried that somebody was going to, you know, come in. I mean, and I said to the lawyers that would they please tell me if there was another national outlet that was interested, but I didn't have an agreement that it was an exclusive or anything like that. But I think also I did feel confident in, like, the originality of the storytelling and the style in which I was telling it, and I didn't think that anybody would do it exactly that way. Then as far as the music, I mean, so we had a wonderful music supervisor, Phoebe Wang, who was just brilliant, and the way the music came about, we were just, you know, kind of talking about vibe, and Laura brought up watching The White Lotus, and Laura was like, that choral element, and I was just like, yes, that is amazing, yes, a chorus is perfect. And then we had a meeting with Phoebe, and I was like, you know, like the Cocteau Twins, and like how you can't totally understand what she's saying, but it's there. And then Phoebe, like, took those notes and found this amazing composer, Carla Pallone, who did the music. And you know, it would be so interesting to hear Phoebe talk about what that back and forth was like.
Yeah, and Carla had never scored a podcast before, and so it was a real endeavor for Phoebe to work with her, and for that collaboration, I'm sure it could be a whole presentation. It was amazing.
Okay, next question. And yeah.
Hi guys, I'm Charlotte. I'm an undergrad. I'm not a journalism student, but I have been listening to This American Life, I think, weekly for 21 years. I'm 21. So obviously, like, a massive fan. And I feel like The Retrievals was a very, like, it's a story that felt very suited for the medium that it took. I found myself connecting to the women more so because I was hearing like the particularities of their accents and the emotion in their voice. Like, I don't think it would have been as effective in a written form or even in a documentary. So how do you decide what would make a good audio story versus something that you're like, maybe I'll give this to the New York Times or something?
I mean, I think once I started doing those patient interviews, I just, what was the first thing I said when Ira asked me about the trailer? Like, one of the feelings I had was like I missed sort of being inside the tape. Like there was extraordinary power in so many of those interviews, and if I feel that, then I know that a listener will feel that too. And I just felt excited. There was such a variation too in a way among the patients. It was very special that way. But I think I think a written version of this story could work and be effective, but I just it just felt, I don't have another good answer other than it just felt so right.
Well, it's interesting to think about the difference, because if I were to imagine the written version, the patients and their feelings would be so much less present. Like even if you almost transcribe the quotes.
I don't know about that though, because I do feel like, I do get this. I write prose too, and I do get this question, like, how do you decide if something is audio or something that was written? I think that the style of the script, right, that's sort of like scooping up a lot of different like direct quotes from the patients, like that might well be the style on the page too. But
you don't think there's like an intimacy that comes away from hearing their voices and the pauses and all of that gives it a different valence if you do it as radio?
Oh, for sure. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. Oh, there's an extraordinary intimacy to hearing those voices. Oh my God, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all.
Ira,
yes,
it's pretty quiet in the chat, but there is one question here about Susan's approach to Donna and the decision to make her as sympathetic as you did. And did you grapple with that? Did you ever feel, to talk about her addiction so sympathetically? Was that an editorial decision? Did you go back and forth at all?
Yes, I mean it's interesting to I think there's listener interpretation, right, in terms of whether the series is sympathetic to Donna. I mean, one could argue that even giving Donna as much space as she occupies in the series is sympathetic or too sympathetic. Yes, we thought a lot about that. I mean, I think that the trajectory of the series, right? So if we come to episode 2 and here's this person, who is this person? We're meeting this person. What is the story that this person tells? I think by the time you get to the end of the next episode, episode 3, right, you start to hear that story being kind of like pulled apart a little bit in court. The patients are listening to the story. The patients are reacting to the story. The patients are, patients who started out with empathy to Donna because of her addiction are now feeling like, oh, wait, I don't feel the same way that I once felt. And so by the end of episode 3, my feeling about what the series does is it's a less sympathetic take on Donna. Is that your feeling?
I was surprised. We got a lot of comments and reviews from people who were angry that there was even any focus on Donna, and who seemed to have maybe stopped listening in episode 2, so they didn't get the full picture of where the portrayal was going from that point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes.
Great. Hello, my name is Francisco. I have a question for all three of you. How do you talked about it a little bit, but can you expand a little bit about how you know when an episode is ready, and also for you, Ira, how you knew when you were good?
You guys go first.
Okay.
I mean, knowing when an episode is ready, it's just like you hear it and you feel good about every part. It feels as tight as it can be where it needs to be tight. It feels like you've solved every problem that you know how to solve.
And we usually would have a chance to listen to a rough mix, and then you hear all kinds of little things like, oh, we don't need this line, cut this could move faster. So there's feeling like it's working is one phase, and then feeling like it's ready is usually like a very fine-tooth comb kind of like nitty-gritty process of finishing it.
To answer the question about when I knew that I was good, like I have a deep well of self-loathing, so it didn't actually appear to me like so clearly for a long time. But there came a point where, when I was around 30, I understood that I could throw myself into any situation getting tape, and I would be able to find stuff that was amusing to me and interesting to me, and I knew I would be able to like just isolate the little moments and make them effective as radio. Like when I was in the field, I could hear the moments, and I knew what to say to make the moments happen. And like I had mastered that part of it, of taking the little things I was observing, and also kind of like moments that I would make happen just by saying something to somebody or something. You just like, there's a lot of like kibitzing around in the tape that I get, where I'm talking to people and trying to push them in this way or that way, and then they give me something back. And there just came a point where I knew like I've got it. I know how to do it. Like I could get into any situation and do it. So, but it took a decade. Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm Yasmin. I'm an MA student in the politics concentration. I'm wondering what the pre-interview or preliminary process looks like when you're, having conversations that don't end up in the final cut. And in cases of sources who go from being off the record to eventually being on the record, how do they get there?
Let's see. In the case of the Retrievals, I didn't exactly do any pre-interviews, because of the sort of boundaries, the conditions of the interviews. Like those were official interviews. Not everybody's tape wound up in the series. I think sometimes when when we're sort of scouting for a story, one will call somebody up and talk to them for a while, and then you never want to talk too much because you want to save some of that freshness for the actual interview. But in the case of the series, they were all the actual interviews. And unfortunately, there weren't any sources that went from background to on the record in this case.
Yeah, there was a lot of fear in general. I got the sense that the fertility industry is a small professional world, and people were really nervous to use their name, even people who weren't affiliated with Yale.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Hi, thanks so much for being here. I had a question about the creative collaboration in a process like this one. Susan, you'd obviously been reporting on this for a while. You had a pitch, you had a structure in mind when you came in. So when you're in somewhere you had an idea of what the project was going to be like in your head, how do you then manage that creative collaboration once both of y'all are partners on a show or a long form piece like this one?
I mean, I was so fortunate to work with Laura and with Julie Snyder at Serial. I felt like it was a really, it was just one of my favorite parts of this whole process. We were all really aligned, I think, in the vision for the series. Laura brings a lot of really special qualities to this project. Laura has a background doing investigative reporting. Laura also has a literary sensibility. I just felt just so extraordinarily lucky to be working with somebody who cared, and somebody who cared as much as I did about this story.
And I will also gush and say, and say that this was one of those projects where I felt right away Susan is the perfect person to do this project, and she had a vision for it that made sense to me, that I loved and was really excited about, and just wanted to be associated with it and affiliated with it somehow. And then just watching her work, it was a real pleasure to see how she was able to shape this for her voice and stay consistent that whole time. And I feel like it's not always the case when I'm editing a project, but with this one, your vision was so clear and the voice of the project was so strong that it was more of a job for me of clearing out things that didn't conform to the vision that you laid out, or that weren't exactly in the voice of the series, like in a gentle way, I hope. And just kind of like nudging things in the right direction, like, oh, there's a chorus, like talking about how we thought about and talked about the music and the scoring. It was just like gentle nudging to let the thing be what it wanted to be in Susan's hands.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Can I just?
Yeah, you have another.
Yeah,
I
have a couple here. I'll just do the first one. The series raises a lot of questions, including huge ones like, is incarceration ever good? Did you ever worry about having too many questions, and how did you know what was the right amount?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the exciting things about the material. So for instance, the question of incarceration and Donna, that sentencing hearing, those questions are like being asked in that room, and the patients who are watching the hearing are asking those questions. So those questions are really organic to the storytelling. It's not me sort of coming in and being like, okay, now like we're just going to move away from the story part while I like explain, some ideas about incarceration. It all felt organic. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to do another online
Sure,
one?
I'll do the other one. For Susan and Laura, was it maddening or frustrating listening to the patients talk about how none of the doctors or nurses listened to them? And I guess her bigger question is, how hard was it to remain neutral?
I mean, I think that there's a moment in episode 5, the tape that opens episode 5. There's a patient named Isha, and Isha is telling me about a postpartum visit that she has with her OB, and she says that it came up that she's part of this lawsuit against Yale, and the OB says, well, what's the big deal? You got pregnant. And that was a moment where I was really taken aback, and you hear it in the tape, where I'm just like, well, what a thing to say, as if the only thing that matters is that single outcome and not the entire experience. So that is a moment where I, found frustration, shared that outrage. As far as remaining neutral, I'm not sure if I saw it as my job to remain neutral so much as it was to remain fair, to make sure that I did everything I could to to talk to staffers at the clinic, to hear about what was going on in their heads. And and again, I wish that I could have included more of that in the series, but I saw it as my job to be sensitive, to be fair, but I don't know that I could be neutral. I mean, I felt very passionately connected to these experiences.
In practice, though, what is the difference between being neutral and being fair? Doesn't fairness drive you to neutrality?
I don't think so. I don't think the podcast has a neutral tone at all. And what do we mean by neutrality? Do we mean by like giving each party a voice? Yes, we reached out to Yale. Yes, we did that. But I don't think I'm neutral on the question of here's what it's like to be a woman in this position who feels like her pain is being dismissed and she is being ignored. I just don't feel neutral about that. You can tell by the way I'm talking about that. So that would be a pretense. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
My question's for Susan. Some of my favorite things that you've
Get
produced-
closer to the mic, actually. Sorry.
Some of my favorite things that you've produced for This American Life have involved women talking about their secrets or talking about things they might not have shared with other people. And some of the takeaways I've had from those episodes have been that we don't do that. We keep things secret because there's shame, and talking about that can be a collective alleviation from that shame. And I think about Donna's quote in the episode where she says she feels better after she talks to the authorities, as exemplifying that, and then the listeners who heard it and then wrote in about how it spoke to them in a way nothing else ever had. And I guess my question is, when you only had an hour with these patients and there were lawyers present, how did you structure the interviews so that they could get to the place where they were talking about IVF in a way that they might not have, especially since their pain hadn't been believed, since even maybe other women might not have believed it?
Thank you, and thank you for saying that about my work. That means a lot to me. I said at the outset of every interview, like, this is really, personal and private stuff that we're talking about. If there's anything that you want to stop talking about, anything that you say to me that you're like, actually, I don't want you to use this part, like, that's fine. You can't do that later. It's harder to do that later. But now in this interview, it's, you can't call me up after the interview and say, you can't use that. But I think that I think that I've been interviewed about personal and sensitive stuff, and what makes me feel safe in that setting is when the person has really done a lot of prep, and I feel like is grounded in the questions and kind of sturdy, and I just try and be the person I would want to be interviewed by when talking about like the stuff that makes me feel vulnerable.
Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for being here tonight. So this is obviously a very heavy topic to be working on, and I guess this question is more general than even this project, but what is it like to be working with such an intense subject, a very emotional subject, and do you have to separate at certain times between your job and your role as a reporter or producer and your feelings about it?
I have a hard time doing that. Like, it just all mixes together. And at various stages, I lost sleep in different ways. It would sort of ping from thing to thing. I think whenever you're doing any kind of story, right, you feel a responsibility to the subjects, and I felt an enormous responsibility to everybody, to the patients. I mean, to Donna too. Who I lost a lot of sleep over that. I felt responsibility to the staffers who took a risk in talking to me and getting it right. So I guess I don't have a good answer as far as how I separate. I don't think I'm that good at it, but I think the upside of that is that feeling gets funneled into the work, and it's very important to me that my work make people feel something.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi there, is this close enough?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Megan Spinella. Sorry, I'm actually a public health student, so I'm an imposter, but interested in health reporting and storytelling. So one of the main questions that I wanted to ask everyone here that's done, I know you all have a lot of experience with health reporting. How do you get around such extreme access issues when it comes to either the institutional level with Yale or Columbia, New York Presbyterian, or say at the individual level with providers and HIPAA and everything around that, and additionally with patients, getting them to share such sensitive health information that they're not very willing to share or worried about that information getting out to the public?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are such good questions, and I didn't crack them right in this case. I mean, Laura, you have experience reporting on. I mean, you might have some very practical.
Well, I feel like what's kind of been surprising to me is that you can find patients who do want to talk about their story. It's usually just finding an avenue to get to them that doesn't go through an institution that's worried about HIPAA. So as long as you have some other way to get to them, or at least to deliver a message, like, hey, can you share this paragraph with your patients and then people can reach out to me, is a strategy that I've used. Or just like Google reviews have people's real names. So you can just, if you're interested in reporting on some kind of doctor's office, hospital, whatever, you can find real people through the Google reviews. And also finding, like, this is a whole different question than what you were asking, but in terms of like finding people who've worked at a place, or in like residential treatment settings, I've also found that like there are like clusters of people who have a shared experience of an institution, and if you can find one of those clusters of people, like either it's like a cohort of people who went to rehab together, or like a bunch of nurses who worked at a certain hospital together for a period of time, like if you can find some social group like that and find one of them, then you can get connected to a whole crew.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Qingyun, and I'm pretty interested in the field of fertility, so I'm very excited to be here. And my question is, the first one is, it's been like almost half a year since you already got this published. So I'm wondering, like when you're doing the editing or afterwards, is there any moments that you feel, oh, I should also include something else, or I should have asked a follow-up question on this part of the interview? If so, what is the question, or who else do you want to reach out to? And my second question is that, like you also mentioned that the fertility industry is very small, and as far as like I know, it's also a bit sketchy. So do you think this episode is just a tip of the iceberg? If so, what are some suggestions you can offer for someone who wants to like explore more in this industry? Thank you.
Sure. Yes. I mean, so as far as, I mean, when I was reporting the series, right, there were lots of times, you know, I would get into the car after an interview and I would be like, oh my God, I didn't ask the thing. And when you're reporting, you know, sometimes you still have the opportunity to actually ask the thing. As far as things that, you know, now that the series has been released, that I would ask, I mean, I think there are like big buckets of things, right? Like I keep mentioning like the staffers at the clinic, you know, that part of the story to me like remains really untold. Like we heard a lot in the series about a patient's experience of pain. What is it like for the staffers? What is it like for the healthcare providers? I you know, that is something that I remain really curious about. And then as far as the fertility industry, you're right that it seems often to be sort of, you know, the scandal-ridden industry, right? Like, you know, the wrong eggs, wrong sperm. But I think that they're right. There are obviously places that are doing this work with like the utmost integrity. And as far as advice about, like, you're interested in reporting on the fertility industry? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm planning to do my master's on this. Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, I'm trying to think if I have any like practical advice about diving in. Do you have any thoughts,
Maybe
Laura?
talk after, because there's probably a lot to get into.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
I was wondering, Susan, if you could give us some tips for tracking. I'm thinking about the episode where you're just reading court documents, and it was so amazing, and you didn't over dramatize anything. So I was wondering if you could share some tips on your tracking skills.
Thank you for asking that. I mean, I was very nervous about how much I would be reading. I don't consider myself somebody who's like an especially like skilled performer. I feel like I'm competent, but I do feel like there, you know, I read a lot for this series, and I think I got better over the course of doing it. And I think the way that I got better was I just got more confident, and I just sort of embraced who I am. and the thing you just named is the thing that, you know, there's a, I wouldn't say a mildness, I wouldn't say, but yes, there's a reluctance to make anything too big. But I did have fun with that courtroom episode. Like there's like a little flair, like it was a little fun to perform. Yes. Yeah, that's, I think also my advice as far as tracking is if the writing feels like you, if the writing feels like yours, it's easier to read.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, that seems like all of our questions. I'm going to close on this. Like, Laura, you're such a wonderful editor, and I feel like lots of people who are starting in journalism don't consider editing as the path for them. I feel like everybody seems like they're always funneled into being a reporter, and can I just say, like, most of my week I'm an editor, and I really love editing, and I feel like actually the reason why our radio show is good is because of the editing. And like, do you want to make a pitch? Do you just want to talk about what it's like to be an editor? Say inspiring words that will make more people become editors. We want talented editors. Like,
yes,
yeah.
Being an editor is great. I think like what I really enjoy about being an editor is that you get to be intimately involved with projects that super talented, interesting, curious people are making. And for me, like I had been a reporter and producer for a long time, and still, of course, will do that, I'm sure, again. But I think what drew me into editing was that I really like the thinking about the construction and structure of how stories come together and how to like make someone's voice feel real and like them in the story. And I also just like really like storytelling and picking apart things and why do they work and why do they not work. And so if you are someone who like watches movies and TV or whatever medium and find yourself being like, that wasn't believable, or like they shouldn't have said that there, that's too early, they should have moved it, then think about maybe editing would be a good path for you. And also I think this is pretty universally true that like editors are very in demand.
Yes.
And so it's also it's helpful to have a job where you're needed as well.
Yeah. Like, and I think like it's funny. I think that great editors, when I think about, I know so many more great reporters than I know great editors. Like it really is just like, I think people with talent just think like, I'm going to be the reporter. But I really think when you find a super talented editor, they really stand out, and then they make everything they touch so much better. And it's really just, I don't know. It's just consider it. Consider it. It's so fun.
Sometimes.
You just have to understand what a good reporter is to be a good editor. She said you have to be a good reporter before you're a good editor. You have to understand reporting for sure. Like, I've never been as good a reporter as the people I edit. Like, I'm an okay reporter with some stylistic moves. Do you know what I mean? But like, I work with people who are like the reporting you did on this, like I've never done reporting as hard as that. Do you know what I mean? Like, but I know how to edit a story like that. So
You spoke to our graduating class a couple of years ago, and you gave this great example, like a visual of what good editing is that you have a project, you want to make it great, the project wants to suck. Do you remember that? I don't know if you could.
Yeah, but I mean, like most stories, they're trying to suck. Like don't you feel like most things you make, like the force of entropy, like when you're making it, it wants to be bad, and it's only by like pulling it up at every corner and just like making every turn the best turn it can be, and every emotional point making it hit with as much emotion as it can. Like, yeah, it wants to suck, and then your job is to make it wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan and Laura, for coming and giving us all this insight into the work that you did. But I want to say especially thank you to Ira, who gave us a master class in how to take apart the work and make it something that is helpful for our audience of students who want to take away this kind of knowledge. So thank you.
We collaborated on those questions.
All of you.
Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming too.